The Express.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Express podcast. We have two illustrious guests today. Two of my personal hitting guys, Mike Brumley and his son, Logan Brumley. Been working with them for a couple years, and just people that I not only love but really trust when it comes to just my career and development as a baseball player. And there's a lot of good wisdom and stories that they've imparted to me and to a lot of other folks that they've helped. So just really excited to share just things about development, about growing up, about becoming a better baseball player and man that we're excited to get to today. So I guess just go ahead and start. Brum, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit and just kind of like your background and past, because I know you've, just with your dad and just your kind of trajectory going to Texas and big league life and then to where you've gotten to now. Just give us a little bit of that story if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, my father was a major league player. He retired in 71, which I was 9 years old. So I have a little bit of, thoughts towards that past part of it. And just, growing up in the game and being around that way, I mean, I enjoyed playing all sports growing up, and I played every sport there was until that sport kicked me out, right? So basketball, 8th grade, finally booted me out. I did play 4 years of high school football in Oklahoma and, loved that and all that stuff. And then, the transition, my dad went to Oklahoma and my mother went to Oklahoma State. Being an Oklahoma kid, growing up in Tulsa, and didn't have any scholarship offers there. So I ended up having two offers. One was Wichita State and one was Texas. And so my thought was, college baseball was just starting to be impacted. I think ESPN's first big carry of the World Series was 79. And which I was a high school graduate in 80. And so, this is the first time you got to see it on a different stage. And, but I did coming down to it was, I live in Oklahoma. If it's 35 degrees in February in Oklahoma, it's 19 in Wichita and it's 65 in Austin. So I sort of took that part of it, the weather and just the opportunity at that time. And so that was that. I went on to play 14 years professionally. And really my coaching motivation, I just didn't like coaches, in general. And that's really what motivated me to be a coach. I thought there's got to be a better way to have inside information and understanding and developing an athlete's mind, along with what he does physically and the grind and how difficult and how much failure you're going to deal with in all sports, growing up in a developmental stage. So that's kind of where that went. I got after my playing, I got back in and spent 26 years in player development. I managed 8 years. I did rookie ball, A ball, double A, 3 years in triple A. Became the minor league coordinator twice, Texas for 4 years, the Dodgers for 2, had 5 years as a major league coach. But when I started the hitting side, which I'm at now, kind of started in that transition. I started studying because we didn't have we didn't have all the analytics when it came to positioning, like the defense is like so big now. So I was kind of having to do it myself. Well, to go in and play Minnesota Twins, and okay, Morneau, Mauer, like how do we control these guys to win? So this was I started looking at all these great hitters, and I started looking at the commonalities of what are they doing? Like what are they doing late in the count? What are they doing when they're upping? What are they doing when they're feeling good? What do they do day after night? When the energy levels are different and the competitive side and the backgrounds aren't, there's just so many factors. And that kind of led me into, I love teaching, base running and defense and all, but I thought, okay, the make or break from a career standpoint is offense, right? I mean, you can pick it all you want and, you can have all this speed and all this, but if you can't hit.
If you don't hit, you don't play.
And it doesn't matter. I developed Sean Figgins at the time, 5'8", 175 pounds. I said, Sean, if you don't drive the ball, you're not going to play in the big leagues. I said, so, we end up, starting to make that emphasis, even for, role players and guys that, aren't, 6'5", and, you go, okay, this guy's going to hit 30 homers. No, you got to be an offensive player and you got to learn to get the most out of it. And that's kind of where it all led.
And then, Logan, you kind of you've gotten into coaching pretty early too, obviously working with your dad, and then y'all spent time in Taiwan, I know, and then you were up in Seattle for a little bit, kind of doing your own gig. So just kind of walk us through your story a little bit, and then we'll get into a little bit more of just kind of some development things and where we're kind of missing the mark in the world this day.
Yeah, I mean, I tell people I grew up in the clubhouse. And my best friends were anywhere from 25 to 35 years old, so, and being homeschooled growing up after about second grade, just because of the traveling we were doing, he was coaching and roving in the minor leagues a lot of my childhood. I got to experience the pro side of it, being a third generation ball player. I didn't make it to the big leagues, which was my dream, but I was able to kind of experience it through my dad's career. And, it just kind of grew my passion. I finished my career out in 2016 and played college, some indie ball, got out of my system, and then went to Taiwan with him the first time, as you just mentioned. And I did a couple years of college and went back to Taiwan for 3 years. So I kind of talk about my experienced childhood and all the knowledge my father's imparted me, and all the great baseball people I was around, and to watch players do what they do, but kind of behind the scenes, which I think a lot of kids don't see, the work that it takes to get the major leagues and the struggle part of it. Seeing that firsthand is an eye opener. And, I also just enjoyed just the fun of, watching guys do that for a living. But I kind of say my college experience was kind of where I learned to work hard. It was a small college. I did a lot of the stuff.
Where was it?
It was a Mid-America Christian, and they were kind of bottom of the barrel, and we got to be number 11th in the nation offensively. They went from like 120th to 11th with a lot of the things that we did and getting guys to buy into the program as a whole. I learned to work hard there, and I learned to work smart in Taiwan. I won't go into all of it, but with the language barrier and coming from the Western world, which they do like, with social media and all that, they're pretty connected. Japan is probably their biggest influence, but I kind of learned to work smart there. So I kind of able to hone the efficiency of how I coach and just the passion with that I use in my coaching as far as also understanding a lot of different players from a lot of different backgrounds and how to train them and get them to perform in a way that they can trust their game. At the same time, they're open to learning new things and developing, expanding their game.
Yeah, no, I think I always thought it's so fascinating, even just cultural differences, right, and how we go about our work and our prep. Obviously, I play with Seiya Suzuki in Chicago, and just seeing how diligent, efficient, detailed he is in everything that he does, whether it's in the weight room, in the training room, in the cage. It's like, I don't even know if I could do it. It's so meticulous, but it's so impressive. And I tell him all the time just how amazed I am by him and the gifts that he possesses. I almost I try and impart more of like my mental strengths into him while I learn from him physically, because he's just so gifted. The things that he can do, I just tell him all the time, like, you're our best player. Like, you have more gifts than anybody else on this team. And like, you need to believe that, because that is a little bit of a challenge coming to the major leagues from, other places and other leagues across the world. Is just, yes, this may be the best league in the world, but you are also the best at what you did over there. Yeah. You can do the same thing here. Right. So,
there's a reason I think that obviously they signed him. So
right,
it's easy for me to say as I don't play in the MLB. But I want to touch a little bit on, first off, thank you guys for coming, but just the grind that you sort of talked about. So we had, before we started this podcast, we're talking about just like the high school level situation and how sometimes the expectation of either the high school athlete or the parent doesn't meet the reality of the situation. And so I want to kind of touch on a little bit, which you've been to a bunch of places too, obviously, but your grind in your NAIA school and just how I think kids have this sort of expectation and thought that, if when they get there, it's going to be like it is in high school, or it's not going to be as, hard, or you're going to have better facilities, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a lot of people that play baseball. There's a lot of people that are really good at baseball. Like, how do you think that your grind at your NAIA school kind of developed your hard work and then showed you the levels that baseball was at?
Yeah, as far as in relation to the players, at those kind of schools, you have some kids that feel like they should be at a higher level, and you have some kids that are kind of happy to be there, that are just, pretty excited that they've kind of earned a way into college. And we also, something I didn't mention is we had probably out of our 35 player full roster, we had 16 of those guys were Latinos.
Weren't there 12 countries or something like that?
Yeah, we had quite a few. We had 7 or 8 Dominicans. We had a guy from Colombia, our center fielder was from Colombia. We had a couple guys from Venezuela and a couple guys from Puerto Rico. and a handful of other places. We had a pitcher from El Salvador. We had a pitcher from not Peru, but a couple other countries. But so you get that mix, right? My Spanish got a little better, but
I thought that was real interesting culture-wise, watching the work ethic when people who have grown up outside of our country, like how hard do they think it is? And they play more, everything they do is about enjoyment. And all of a sudden you get in a grind where you got weight room, you got certain things. Yeah, you got certain responsibilities that they have to incorporate. So that's what I like about, I don't think I could do what I do without Logan's background of being, having a high school level of teaching, having working with NAI and working with professionals. The one thing about being in Taiwan, you don't produce, they send you home. There's not like, well, you get to stay around and, we're just developing. No, it's production or get out. So when you start having to deal with that kind of level of success, but I think that's where his background, has been so good. And then being in, working in a high school program in Seattle, which is a whole different part of the country, right? And they're not playing like we play in Texas in the South, right? Our sports are, their sports are that are like extra curriculum, but yet he's in a competitive situation. They had a kid that went in the first round, off that same team. And so this wasn't just some lay down team, but it's a whole different culture because it's in the Northwest and it's not live and die sports. It's like, what's your academics look like? Oh, you're going to go out for sport? Oh, I think that's a good idea. So his background really helps well-round kind of what my experience has been. It's been great.
And I want to get into a little bit further too, just about actual development side. And obviously you've been in the game for so long and you've seen players grow and how players get to the top, right? And how the game has changed, obviously, because, better athletes and just the physical production is different than it's ever been. Yeah. But what development mark do you think is probably the most important, but also where are we missing the mark in terms of development in kids, not only in high school, but as they get into pro ball, then they're trying to obviously make it to the top?
It's funny what, the things that I look at and dealing with it. I'm like, and it's not to criticize. I was over at my dad's house. My dad signed in 1957 and played till 71, right? So he has this, my dad was a love of baseball. And I was reading this book over there at his house. It was about baseball, and it was an interview basically of one of the top players at that time. So he said, when I came into the league, the work ethic, how we thought about the game, the fundamentals that we understood about how to play. He goes, these kids that are coming to the big leagues today don't have that baseline. They don't have the fundamentals down. They don't understand the importance of work. The quote was 1897. So how long has big leaguers been griping about the young players coming up?
Right.
So there's a little bit. So this has been going on in our game for a long time where we're a little bit like the next generation is not as good. What I see the biggest issue, number one, they want instant gratification because they have it at their fingertips 24/7. So my thought is, I said, hey, this is not Wendy's drive-through. You don't pull up and order what you want, pull around the corner and pick it up. There's some work to get done, to get translated, even the truth that you're feeling, to be able to put it into a game setting and all that stuff. So I think their dedication to understanding who they want to be told, what are we doing today in the workout? Okay, what do you think we should do? What's your input on your own development? And I think that's what I see. I've dealt with players when, they're like, hey, I love what we're doing in the cage. Let's do that again tomorrow. And I'm like, all right, what is it? Like, well, don't you know? Well, yeah, I know.
I need you to know. I need you to know.
So I think that's part of it. And then from the other side, like working privately with really good young players is, again, I think it goes back to they get in a hurry about their own success and not let it play out a little bit. And I get it. Our window, we all know our window it's small. Short, it's small, right? But it doesn't seem at the time. And so I think that's what we deal with. It's just that attitude of,
and sometimes it comes from the parents, where they want things for their kids, and they also invest in opportunities like taking lessons with us. And so I think there's some kids that do have a good mindset or kind of trying to find their way in terms of, okay, what does that look like as far as timetable and understanding. There's a little bit of patience involved, but using good examples like Dansby, as much success as he's had coming as such a high-profile player into the major leagues, and obviously we just, kind of connected with him several years back, my father and then me coming in on it. But using him as an example, Riley, being able to kind of talk about the stages of their development with the skills that they have can give some perspective to these guys, because they do respect guys like the way that they play, the performance aspect, all those things. So it's a good testament to them as well, as far as, and this, just like he's talking about, it's not instant. There's some work involved, but there is also light at the end of the tunnel in terms of seeing progress every day and kind of getting them to look at, the right things, getting them to look at some of the details where you can see some progress or some things in the details, but the overall picture, it's still got some time left.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's such a hard thing for coaches in this day and age, is you never stop learning, right? Like as a player, I'm going into my 8th year, and there's an endless level of knowledge, right? And so many times we're so stuck in just doing it one type of way that one way for me may work, but as I go into this next year, like we were just talking about, being an honest self-evaluator, I feel like is one of my better strengths, because I can, this is our 3rd day hitting, and coming in first day and having an honest conversation about, this is what I know I need to do to get better.
Right.
Now I lean into you for how to get me to that point, but I know what it is that I need to work on to get there, and you just kind of guide the path on how to get to that point. But I think it's just so interesting seeing young kids, they don't understand like my full story and like how I got to where I got to. And it was a lot of work. And even my first 3 years in the big leagues were very underwhelming, right? I had all the pressure of being the number 1 pick, and, I the big trade, and I come back and I'm at home, and, my first 30 games in the big leagues, I set the world on fire, and then I was horrible my first full year. And then I was a little bit better my second year, but was hurt. And then same my 3rd year, I started to piece it together, but still had some injury issues. And I didn't really, prove myself until about 4 years into the big leagues. And, I even have to remind myself to be patient with young prospects coming up. And the first thing I tell them is, listen, I have patience, okay? I've learned patience. I have patience for physical things, for development and understanding, how the game works at this level. But I do not have any patience for lack of mental toughness, for being a bad teammate, for not even knowing the basics of the game. I don't have time for that, right? Like, and if that's how you want to operate, then you can go somewhere else. I mean, it's just as candid as that, because we're trying to win. And if you're not going to help us win, then you don't need to be here. And at least if some of the physical mistakes show up, the mental mistakes, the emotional mistakes, those have to be, kind of cut out. And that's something that it's just not taught the same way, or it's not learned the same. There's not as much emphasis on it as when I was growing up in high school, college, and then obviously in pro ball. I complained all the time about pro ball when I was in the minor leagues. I hated it, right? Like I hated it. And I wasn't even in the minor leagues long, like a year. But it was a grind every day, right? Like you earned what you got every single day. The food was bad. Like I'm in Mississippi, 110 degree heat, taking mass ground balls, doing fundamentals every day. But I look back at it and say, thank God I did that, because I appreciate what I have now so much more, because I went through the grind and struggle of it all,
How much of what you guys do is, because it seems like I've been around good coaches and a couple elite level coaches such as yourself, and how much of when you have this younger prospect who's coming up is you explaining to them the importance of the detail? Because like for you, you get it. Like you understand, like you're talking about, like, what are we doing today in the cage? You get, like, you have an idea of, now granted that comes with time of, hey, I'm doing this because I want this result. And then he's going to help you get to that result that you guys have come to a conclusion on. But I think with a lot of young kids, it's like you said, like, well, I want to do the same thing. Well, why? Well, I don't know. Either it felt good, or kids, or like I watch coaches sometimes who they take, BP or do cage work, and they're just hammering balls, like just hitting balls. And if you watch you guys, like it's in spurts of 5 or 10. And then you discuss, and you're searching for that feeling. And that's why I'm so excited when that video is coming out. Like I was telling him, it's going to be so good because the proof is in the details. And he's at the highest level. You guys are at the highest level. And you're still talking about the little details. And I think oftentimes when kids are in high school and they're having to do the fundamental work that they hate, they lose sight of.
So boring. So boring.
Yeah, I hate this. Sure. I hate this. It's like again, like I was talking how people were, hammering me about Mac, about what he's going to do. And I made a joke to somebody, and I was like, well, I guarantee you the first thing I'm not giving them is a glove. Like, I'm going to give them a pad. And they're like, well, why? And I'm like, because you're teaching. And then see, like the little details like that, like that stuff matters in their like a player's development. But how much time do you guys spend teaching them the importance of that detail? Or are you guys basically at the level where like you're only taking on clients or helping people who understand the importance of that?
I mean, I definitely go into some of those first sessions. Now, fortunately for me right now, I haven't had, it's been a long time since I had a player come in, you know, under the father's idea, you know, and I work with them for the first time, and I go, man, I don't think I'm the right guy. You know, I'm fortunate that hasn't happened to me in a long time. I think it's only been twice in my coaching career where I just said, I can't help him. Either he knows more than me already, and he's 17, you know, or, you know,
he's a genius.
Or he's gone to, I hate to say it, but he's gone to IMG. He's gone to all these different places. So he said he's been overcoached. So now I try to bring some truth into it. And then they were like, well, and then they try to fit their idea into my thought, you know, like, so I said, you can't force it. Like, and you can't drive, you know, round peg in square hole. It's just like, but what I see is, you know, with the young players today, I mean, it's when they have failure, because that's what we learn the most from probably. And there's some kids who are so good at athletes, they've never struggled. Like, they went out for Little League ball in first grade, and they're their star. And they've been the star all the way through. Now they get to the high school level, and some of the mechanics and ideas of how they perform is not as good. So now they start to get exposed. But, you know, so sometimes you need the exposure. That's the thing with us. When we look at the film and we evaluate the move, it's hard to expose him in a controlled environment. Now, but so we have to look at the background and go, yeah, I'm getting away with it. And he's good at saying, I get away with it now, but that wouldn't happen if that ball's 97.
I said that literally first day. I said, we were breaking it down saying, the moves look pretty clean. And I just kind of said, like, you know, to my wife when I got home it was a great first day, right? We accomplished a lot. But I know that right now what I built today was a cage swing. And I'm trying to build like you said, a Hall of Fame swing, right? And so we made the, you know, proper adjustments and understand that the proof is in the details, right? The proof's in the pudding, and being able to focus on those little things. And that's why we do the video work. And not that video works for everybody, especially younger kids, because, you know, it can get a little over analytical at times. But that we need that tool so that we can, you know, make the necessary changes. Or I'll be like, hey, that was a great round because I hit 8 straight line drives. Well, I should be able to, right? Like I'm in the big leagues and you're flipping a ball 10 miles an hour. I should be able to manipulate it. However, but that's not going to play for a 162, a playoffs. You're facing the DeGroms and Scherzers of the world.
And I think it's important too, like, again, when they go and watch that video, and I'll probably put it in there, but there was times in which you caught yourself. So you would say, like, you would take a pitch and you'd be like, oh, well, like, hey, that was a better take than what I usually do. My weight was here, or my hands were here, or I saw it differently. And the importance of that is not that you're being like, oh, pat myself on the back. It's that there's been times, and like you've self-evaluated, where you haven't taken pitches how you were supposed to, or you haven't stayed on balls like you were supposed to. And it's you accepting that failure. And I think another part of kids is, you know, let's say they're getting exposed and they're like, oh, I don't want to be exposed. It's like, well, if you want to get better, you kind of need to be, because, and it's not you saying, well, I'm only doing that because he's throwing this. Like, no, it's like you said, you're missing, like, what was it? Sliders or curves. You going under curves or whatever, under sliders. And you're like, well, why am I going that? And then you going back to the dugout and being like, well, it didn't break. Yeah. It's like, well, did it really not break? Or is there some little fundamental detail of why you're not staying on it the way you should?
Right. And that's the importance of taking self-ownership over everything.
Correct.
And when you get to the point, and this is another thing that trying to impart on younger kids, is if you just always take ownership over everything, no matter if it's easy to blame or say, yeah, it didn't break as much as it's supposed to. It's really just kind of an excuse for why I didn't hit that pitch, you know, and being able to take ownership over, you know, whether it's my swing or my approach, my plan, anything that's happened. You know, a good coach always said to me, there's no such thing as a bad fungo, right? You hear so many times like, hit a fungo. Well, dude, hit a bad, it's like, no, catch the ball, right? Like there's, and I think the fundamentals part, and that's what we've talked about this, that's what makes Wash such a good coach, right? We do the same thing every day. It's boring.
Yeah.
We make it fun because we like to talk a lot of trash to each other.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I brought that same kind of concept to Chicago, and he would always say, like, if you want to be a good fielder, you do the fundamental things right, and that enables you to make the better plays.
Great plays, right.
So, no, it's been interesting. And then the other thing I really would love to touch on is just how your dad was kind of involved in FCA and how he kind of got that whole thing going. And obviously, we're a faith-based podcast. We love talking about God and Jesus, and even as silly as it may seem, some of the divine intervention we've had in the cage and conversations that we've had, and how he's put y'all in my life, and hopefully vice versa. And just some of those conversations we've had and how important that's been, in our growth together, not only as, working together, but as friendship and all that kind of stuff.
To me about Mike Harris, he was in Rome, his chase rate, and they said, hey, when are you going to fix this? I go, well, number one, he's 19. I said, number two, I go, do you want me to get him careful?
Right.
Yeah. Where he doesn't know what he wants to swing at? I said, I don't think that's the answer.
Because that was what they were just talking about, was just parents and how they like guardrail everything and won't let their kids fail. But in reality, that's what's needed, is that failure. You can't just protect them every step of the way.
My dad was, and I think that's one thing. Looking back on my father was a professional baseball player for 13 years, got out of baseball and went into ministry. So my dad was a full-time evangelist and a pastor. So and he was a catcher. So take that catcher's personality and throw it on the spiritual side of it. And I was fortunate. I remember my dad was speaking at up in Colorado on a summer retreat. Well, the summer retreat for coaches, FCA, why? The summer coaches, they're all coaching. Baseball's all coaching. So I had breakfast. This is when I was a kid. I had breakfast with John Wooden 4 consecutive days where he sat right on the other side of the table from me. My dad was here. Johnny Majors was here. Grant Taft was here. Tom Osborne. There was all these great coaches that were at this conference. And, and just being around and listening to the stories and of course, Wooden was incredible to listen to. And then when I was with the Dodgers, right before, maybe a year or two before he died, we had a thing where we went out to see him, and he named the start. He was in his 90s. He named the starting lineup of his baseball team his senior year.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah, he was like 96, and he wasn't talking about the championships at UCLA. I mean, he could go all the way back to his background. So my dad was good about that type of work ethic and taking responsibility. And I think that probably gave me the eye opener. I think I was a junior. I was a junior in high school that summer. And my dad, I get in the car after a game, and my dad goes, Mike, I think I got it figured out. I said, okay. So I'm sitting there, and of course I was at the age now that I was sitting in the front seat and my mother was sitting in the back seat. You remember that transition? Yeah. That used to be a transition.
Tough transition.
I don't think they do that now. But anyway, so I'm sitting there, and my dad says, he goes, Mike, I got it figured out. I said, what's that? He goes, we get home tonight. He goes, get that uniform off and give it to your mother. Let her wash it, dry it, fold it. And he goes, and I'll run you over to the coach's house and you can turn your uniform in. He goes, the way you play the game and the respect for the way you're playing it, he goes, you don't deserve to play. He said, you need to get out. This is when I was a junior. And I was like,
high school?
Yeah. Now I'm like, man, I need to make an adjustment in my game, I guess, And so then, and that changed. I was fortunate. I was around some really great football coaches who really taught me how to work and understood the weight room. That's what I loved about that sport. And then all of a sudden the light came on my senior year, and I was just another. In fact, I talk about the state championship team. I played with Mickey Tettleton at Southeast Oklahoma City. State championship game my sophomore year, I hit 9th. So I was like the 8th best hitter on our team, as a sophomore, and to go on and But my dad was good at accepting responsibility and putting the work in, and being tough about it a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely think it's an important thing too. Like, that's a tough lesson, I guess. It's funny you say that. I had a coach. His son is probably, I don't know, 9, but he played at. He's a dual sport athlete at Mississippi State, like incredible athlete. And he was talking about he's watching his son, who's a baseball junkie. Like, it's actually funny. He's like, one of these days I'm going to bring you to his house. He's like the biggest Dansby fan. All he does is watch your stuff on YouTube, and he just like recreates your swings. And he sends me videos. But
he tapping the toes as he walks.
He's doing the
And
whole, like,
I don't know if I'm
back.
fully. I mean, I was a huge Nomar fan, so I mean that usually makes a lot of sense.
I know, the
was
batting
obsessed with-
gloves and all that. Yeah. So, but he was saying his son was playing whatever, Little League, and they're rotating him around, just fall league to keep him fresh. And he could tell his son was like messing around. Like a ground ball went to him, and he's the best player on the field. And he kind of was like, let it go by him and was laughing and smiling. And his dad was like, you know, he looked over at his wife, and he said, it was funny because my wife said, are you going to say something to him, or do I need to? Mm-hmm. It's because he was like, I can't sit here and watch this. Right. Like, so he had to have a conversation. It was like, yes, we're having fun, but it's also like you're competing. And I think that's an interesting point. I think kids, like when we talk about transfers, and we were talking about this earlier, and like other stuff, is I really do think there's a competition problem. Like, I think that a lot of younger athletes don't really want to compete, or they say, oh yeah, I'll compete. But you only want to compete to a certain point. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't really want to go through the grind and compete and put yourself out there. So I think that's
hard,
kind of
because it's
I
hard.
see that in that showcase life too.
Yeah.
It's like, you just be good. Don't worry about the team. Don't worry about the game. Don't worry about how it's played.
And I feel like, you know, some of it is the fear of, if I put everything I have into it and still fail, you know, where you play with a lot of guys that have a lot of talent, they don't quite push it to that, you know, full go level, because so they can always kind of say, you know, I wasn't exactly going 100%.
Yeah, self-preservation.
There's always that backdoor excuse for them.
Exactly. That's like, I was listening to something the other day, and they were talking about, it's like two guys playing basketball or whatever, and one of them played in college, and they were talking about a story from where they were kids, and they got into like a little scuffle with the neighborhood kids, and one of the kids said, you know, I just come out here to play basketball for fun. He goes, you actually come out here to play basketball and you try. Like, you think you're a basketball player and you're not any good. And he said, he was talking about how that impacted his whole life, because since that point, he hadn't like fully gone. I used to tell like my tight ends for football, like, you're not sprinting. Like, the point of running sprints is not a punishment. Like, we're doing it to get in shape so that when we're late in the game, it's not, I don't have to sub you. We're good. Mm-hmm. And they would always say, no, you're punishing us. I'm like, the second you all sprint and run, we'll stop. Like, I don't know who say it, but it's like the old phrase, do it right, do it light, do it wrong, do it long.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, if you just get to, but they won't push themselves to that level. So then we'll put them on a clock or whatever. And even then, like, they're not really pushing themselves to that standard. It's kind of like when you come to like weightlifting, like people say, well, if you can hit 8 reps, you're not really, your intensity is not high enough. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, you know, so that's kind of, it's an interesting mindset of like, are you really going to put yourself out there and say, like, I gave it my, that's what I love, like when, you know, Cam Newton's a hot topic right now, but his Super Bowl interview after they lost and he didn't handle it well or whatever and was frustrated, and people are like, I don't understand. I'm like, he gave it everything. He put everything out there that he had and still came up short. That is a tough realization.
And then to go and give try and go give a professional response to someone
who's
nitpicking one decision that you may or may not have made.
Correct.
And no, that's why, at the end of every year, man, like, obviously there's been twice in my career, once in college and once in the big leagues, where you don't end on I gave it everything I got and it didn't work out. You know, I won the World Series in 2014 in college, and then in 21 here in Atlanta. And I mean, it was just like every other year when the year ends, you know, whether it's the last game of the season or, you know, this past year it was our first game in Milwaukee at the end of the season when we were truly eliminated, right? And it's emotional, man. Like every time I always go through it, I cry, I struggle to get through interviews, because when you truly empty the tank and give everything you have and it doesn't work, that hurts. But yet you can use that as the, what do you want to call it, the motivator or whatever, to say like, but this is also why I do it, because it means this much to me that if I fail at this, it crushes me, right? And so kids, I'm not saying all kids are like this, but kids just don't like going through that pain. And, you know, I kind of do. That's why I still do it.
We have kids who they'll say, you know, well, I kind of wanted the season to be over anyways. Like, that used to like get me
Then-
fired up.
Then I
'Cause
don't
I'm like,
want
what do
you
you
here.
mean? Because I would give anything right now. Like, forget any other level of sport. Like, I'd give anything right now to go back and play one more high school game.
Right.
You know
Same.
what I mean?
High school basketball for me, I miss it like every day.
And if you ask,
Like,
if
man,
you
I wish
ask
I-
like professional athletes, like I talk to like Kenyon all the time. Say if you could go play one like game one more time, like what game would you play? And he doesn't say his famous kick six game versus Clemson. He doesn't say his Miami Miracle. He'll say, I wish I could go play West Forsyth when we lost in high school. like what?
Mhm.
Like he's like why does that stick? He's like, because we gave everything. And I remember before that game, we had a couple of juniors who were just like, yeah, I mean, it's cold, it's whatever. And I looked at Ken and said, we're gonna lose. And we did, because you can't have that mentality. So like when kids are, oh, I wish it'd be over, or oh yeah, baseball season's over this year, we're on to basketball. It's like, what? Like you should be devastated that it's over. And that's also the hard part is, you know, like I just covered the state championships this week, but you see some of the kids, like they're Walton played, Walton's like a premier high school here, and they were undefeated and they were number 7 in the nation, and they lost.
They got beat. Yeah, I saw that.
They got beat, and their quarterback was like distraught. He had thrown like 48 touchdowns and 3 interceptions on the year, and he threw 4 that game.
4 picks.
That game. And he's like, everything he had was gone, and people were trying to console him and this and that, and he just like lost it. And other people were like, yeah, I don't think it's that big a deal. I'm like, that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
It's the biggest game of the year. It's like any game. I get upset losing in a game of dominoes. Like I don't care.
Yeah,
So-
me and Mal get into it on Uno. I'll tell you.
Oh yeah, I know.
Competitive games.
I
No,
know.
but I mean it's such an interesting thing just seeing the cyclical nature of sports and just where kids are, and you know, at the end of the day, like we gotta take these guardrails off these kids, man, if they're gonna have a chance.
For sure.
So-
I think that's a huge part. And I think what really helped me too, being undersized and all that stuff, was my spiritual side of my father preaching to me about I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. You know, like those mindsets. And I said this, I managed my first 5 years of managing, and I enjoyed managing. I felt like I did a good job developing. I woke up every morning going to the ballpark saying, I want to be the coach that I wish I could have played for every day. Who is that? Get me better, but hold me responsible. Have me take responsibility of our actions. Wins and losses happen on the field, not out of that dugout, right? And I was convinced of that. But the two things, you're managing the minor league 140 games. The 2 books that impacted me the most was Coach Wooden's book, They Call Me Coach, and the book of Proverbs. And it was amazing. Like I was doing the day of Proverbs, there's 31 Proverbs. And it's like, that. So I'd be like, oh, it's May 5th, so I'm going to, the 5th. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's exactly where my team is right now.
Yeah.
So there was things that I needed to understand about the spiritual side of my group, and that's I think that's tied into the work ethic. And I think that's tied into the failure. And that's, I mean, we can always, they say homeschool, right? They're like, always have your kid, this is what they tell you as a homeschool parent, always have your kids read autobiographies and biographies of people. He goes, that's your main, if you're going to have them read anything, read that. Because these experiences are going to show that, man, Abraham Lincoln lost his first 7 races, political races that he ran for, and ended up being, one of the top 2 or 3 impact presidents we've ever had.
Yeah.
And it's like he was a super failure, a big part of his life, and then made this huge impact at this one time. So that's where they tell. So that's where we would.
So
like
I mean,
the kid, right? You had to carry a book around, right? And
I
you've
became
read
a history major.
He's read so many,
through that
and all
experience,
of my kids have read so many autobiographies because I wanted them to see there's struggle out there.
Yeah.
It's not just go, and this is where
It's not all
this is
roses.
where the
No,
this is
it's
where the
not.
online and everybody putting their right. If I
TikToks.
post a selfie, I can hit a couple things to take a couple wrinkles out and smooth my skin out because I want to perceive it. No, this is not who I really am.
Right.
This is who I'm just hoping to trick.
Yeah, we always say like social media is your high point. Like no one posts.
It's your highlight reel.
Yeah, nobody posts it. Like I don't post a picture of me at 4:30 in the morning talking to myself in the mirror. Like you have to go.
You got to
Just-
get up. You got to get up. You
Like,
got
my
to get
truck
up.
is not automatic start anymore. Like, I have to go start my car.
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
You're
you got to
standing
go.
there when the baby just throws up over your shoulder.
Literally,
you know?
yeah. Well, yeah, we've had we've had a couple situations the
Yeah.
last couple.
So-
days.
I think that's huge. I mean,
Yeah.
like go back. Von Grissom asked me, he goes, Brum, when am I going to hit for power? And I was like, 2023, 24. He's like, no. Like nobody wants to look at where I'm
Long
going.
range. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. Well, I guess last thing to just wrap things up. If you just had one piece of advice basically for, I wouldn't even say for players, but more for coaches and parents in this day and age, what would it be?
I think it relates to a lot of things we've been talking about, but just having goals and understanding, how that relates to your kid, to your player that you're in charge of as a coach, and being involved. And I kind of tell, this is through the tutelage of my dad. My experience is like, I want to partner with you in terms of achieving those goals, where it's not just about my knowledge and trying to get you to understand something, or it's about, where I think you should be versus, right. We all kind of have that friction. I think, I don't have kids, but I do see the dynamic, and I think that having goals and, thinking in terms of the process and kind of the path of how to achieve those, and also, the patience and sort of that. I think the other side of what we talked about a little bit, there's kids that are playing, 11 months out of the year since they're 10 years old. They're very committed. They don't have these work ethic issues, but they still have their problems in itself. That might be a topic for another day, but I think having goals and having specific goals that maybe you see a Dansby Swanson emulating as far as, how Dansby's, backhand works or how his swing works under pressure situations and some of those things, his plate discipline, whatever you want to talk about. I think having goals that are based on that and parents understanding that and really investing in that side of it and seeing where that fits into the big picture, the next stage of, your kids or students' career.
And I guess my last question for you, Brum, would be what common denominator in terms of character trait have you seen with some of the best guys you've worked with? Because you've obviously worked with Austin Riley a ton. You worked with Mike Harris when he was coming up. You worked with Duvey. Started doing some things with some other guys. We don't have to get in everybody's name just because don't want to put them out there. But what have you seen as been the biggest, character trait in the guys you've worked with that have been successful at a very high level?
I mean, self-reliant drive, I think, but more so is, and this goes with the coaching side of it, is staying curious in your coaching. Like, how do I want to be curious about a better way to understand it. So when I have a player come in, I mean, that's where we're grinding on it, because we're like, all right, let's get him, we see where his mindset is, we see where ours is, and I think the curiosity, the work ethic, obviously, but just the commitment of being good, and taking that responsibility on whether it's the weight room. And, that's where I look at, I played 14 years. I knew it was time to retire when I didn't enjoy going to the weight room and I didn't enjoy the prep, right? When I started looking at it and when I started getting it, and I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait to go to the gym. I hit every year December 26th. And after that, even when we started having babies and stuff, like all the players, everybody's like on the phone. We didn't have cell phones, but on the phone, like, hey, man, as soon as I get the kids down, I'll meet you at the cage. Yeah. It's like, so we're putting kids to bed at 9:30 or 10, and then we're off to the cage at 10, 10:30 at night and just stay in there till 12:30 and just enjoy every minute of it. So, when you talk about the joy of the game, you love it, but you love being good at it.
Oh, yeah.
The game's not fun to not be. And so I was wondering from a coach's standpoint, right? Like you were talking about those tight ends that needed to pick up the sprints. That's where it's unfortunate that we can't get out there and go, all right, I'll pace these next two sprints. I'll show you exactly what it means.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was running with him because I'm out of shape and old.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I was an offensive lineman, so if I can make the tight end time, that was my thing too. But that's what that I think you got to enjoy the process of it, and just I was just telling them, just compete, and they would always say, well, I can't do this, or I can't. We would have, this is way too detailed, but essentially in the offense we ran, we were asking our tight end to cut off backside defensive ends and stuff like that. We just weren't, built for that, if that makes sense. We were more spread out wide type guys, and it just got to a point where our head coach was like, this is what we're going to do. This is our scheme. And I was like, guys, sometimes in life you're presented with something where this is just how it's going to be. Yeah. And so instead of us sitting here being like, I don't want to do it, let's go. Put yourself in a position.
You got no choice.
Successful.
You got to make it happen.
Yeah. So what's up? So that's what I said. I'll never forget. We were watching film, and this is a long time ago. And one of those guys in the league, and I was like, it's a put up or shut up. What is it about? This isn't tennis. This is football. So either you can do it or you can't. It's that simple. But yeah, it's just kind of, it's hard to, I think, to get kids to be like, hey, we need to be here, and them just being like, yeah, you know. But and it would be different if, you know, like you guys are in a situation where if your mindset doesn't match their work ethic or whatever, like you guys know you're not going to be a good fit. Yeah. You can be hey, we're not going to be a good fit. Right. I got to see this kid for 4 years. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just kind of interesting dynamic.
But those are interesting kids to win over.
It is, because once you get them,
they soar. Yeah, they soar.
I think the other coaching side, talking about the player relationship, is be a good teammate to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, I see guys beat themselves up in the cage. You know, they'll make a swing. They're like, you know, they're just mad. And they're, you know, and I'm like, hey, man, I was in the cage with a guy that made the All-Star team last year. He's scuffling with the same thing.
Yeah.
So
you're not alone.
Give yourself a little bit of
grace.
Leeway,
yeah.
but show up and be present. You know, that's what I think. That's what we emphasize in that. We work with one high school team in Oklahoma. We've been there 8 years. I've been going there 8 years, and they've been in 6 finals, and they've won 3. So we're almost like extended coaching staff, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what we talk about a lot with those guys. And the freshman team coming in, he's like, hey, can you talk to my freshman man and let them know what's up? Yeah. And I'm like, when you come in here, you know what coaches like? People that can actually understanding that drill, understanding that.
Listen.
Being present.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where, you know, we get these kids get loose a little bit because they're not held responsible for it. I talk about that being just from a memory standpoint. Like when I was a kid, you knew your grandmother's phone number by heart. Your uncle, your friends, all your friends, maybe a couple
you had a
girls.
note card that you had to memorize. Your mom put you to memorize.
Now it's like nobody knows. I go up, like, what's your mother's working? They'll be like, it's, you know, I was like, you don't know, you know. Yeah. But I think they need to be responsible for what they're coming in doing.
Yeah, it's kind of like life skills or people skills. Like I know from an education standpoint, like what I'm about to say is going to sound, well, maybe not, but kids can't read. And I say that and you're like, oh, they can read. Like, no, they can, yes, if you put like, hi, my name is Mason, like they can read that. But they can't like analyze documents and passages. And I think too, like when you think about us growing up, and probably you as well, definitely being around him, but like when you were at like a tryout or a practice, like how many times did your coach say, I'm only telling you once, like you better listen in because I'm not wasting my time. We don't have time for me to repeat myself. Yeah. I feel like now it's kids are always like, you know, what'd you say? Or we're doing what? Or it's like, if you don't know, watch the guy in front of you. Well, if he doesn't know,
right?
If he didn't know, you got a problem. It's like, it's talking about your patience level. And I think coaches aren't, not necessarily, not everybody, obviously. And even parents, you're not holding your child accountable for those little personable, like human characteristics to be a productive member of society.
To grow.
To grow, like your boss. How many times I tell kids all the time, how many times would you think my boss would tell me to do something before I got fired? You think I'm gonna be able to show up late to work every day? Like you show up late to class? Or do you think, you know what I mean?
2.
You're right.
Like if you're, same thing, like if you're an athlete, how many times are you gonna show up late to the field? Yeah. How many times are you gonna say, oh, I'm supposed to get 7 squats, I'm gonna get 5 because I'm just not feeling it. Yeah. Like, no, you're cutting yourself short. You cannot do that. Or if you do that, you will not make it to whatever goal.
It's going to cost you.
It's going to cost you.
You pay the piper at some point.
Yeah, so they say, like they say, every yard matters. And then you watch these big games. Every single yard and inch matters. Same thing with baseball. Like the littlest inch of you trying to get to a backhand that you just can't quite get to, that just slips under your glove, that matters.
Yep. Or plans and approaches or whatever it may be. But no, this was great. I appreciate y'all
thank you.
doing this before you get on the road.
This is the last time I want to say, my dad taught me this when I got in player development. And he said, Mike, if you go out to this apple tree, you know, our neighbor had an apple tree. He said, there's a green apple about this big. He goes, is that apple ready to make a pie out of or eat or even pick it to eat it? And I'd be like, no, you'd be sick in your stomach. And he goes, right. He said, but in its state of where it is, it's perfect. It's perfectly where it should be at this point. And that's kind of when I start looking at careers and I'm like, man, he's a A-ball high school, even going high school, college, A-ball, AA, AAA. You're like, he's perfect where he is, but he's not ready to make this pie, you know? And so everybody wants to be at 14, wants to be the perfect apple ready to consume and be at the top level. It's just not going to happen. So there's some patience involved.
Yeah, it takes time. That's perfect ending. Well, we appreciate you guys.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
Thank you.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Yeah.